Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we travel not to the bustling streets of Dickens's London, nor the polished drawing rooms of respectable families, but to a far darker corner of Victorian medicine, one where the very idea of love itself was treated as an illness. Close your eyes and imagine yourself in the late 1800s. Gas lamps flicker in the fog, the scent of coal smoke lingers on your clothes, and beneath the polite chatter of evening tea parties lies a silent, ever-present fear that your innermost feelings, the secret shape of your desires, might mark you as diseased. To be homosexual in Victorian England was not merely to live outside the law, it was to live at war with the doctors, priests and lawmakers who believed you could and should be cured. And the so-called cures were as chilling as any nightmare. Tonight, we will drift through those methods, through bottles of laudanum and cocaine tonics, through electric shocks and whispered hypnosis, through locked asylum doors and the surgical coldness of scalpels. We will see how medicine, rather than offering healing, became another instrument of fear. So let the world outside quiet itself and settle into the past with me. This is not an easy story, but it is one worth remembering. The Victorians were, in so many ways, collectors. They collected butterflies pinned neatly into glass cases, their wings spread in fragile perfection. They collected fossils arranged in rows that told stories of ancient seas and creatures long vanished. They collected diseases too, giving names and categories to every malady they thought they understood. And in their hunger to classify the world, they eventually turned their gaze upon love itself. By the middle of the 19th century, doctors were no longer content to call same-sex desire a sin or a crime, as priests and judges had done for centuries. Instead, they began to describe it as a medical condition, a disorder, an illness that could be studied, recorded, treated. They called it inversion. They spoke of it as degeneration, a flaw of nature, a weakness of the nervous system. And once it was written into medical textbooks, once it appeared in the pages of journals and case studies, it became a thing to be cured. Picture, if you will, the office of a Victorian physician. The air is close with the smell of pipe smoke and varnish. Shelves line the walls, stacked with heavy volumes and bottles of thick glass, their labels written in careful script. On the desk lies a stethoscope of polished brass and a leather-bound ledger waiting to receive another patient's history. You sit across from the doctor. He regards you with an air of gravity, his expression a mixture of professional detachment and moral judgment. He tells you that your feelings, your desires, are unnatural, but not to worry. He has methods that may restore you. And so the treatments begin. Perhaps he prescribes tonics, bitter liquids poured from elegant vials, mixtures that often contained opium or cocaine. You swallow them dutifully, your mind fogging, your body growing dependent, while the doctor notes your progress with satisfaction. Or perhaps it is bromide, a sedative given to dull the nervous system. After weeks of taking it, you feel heavy, drained, unable to focus. Yet your physician insists this is proof the treatment is working, that your body is being calmed, your instincts subdued. Others were ordered cold baths each morning, long immersions in icy water that left the skin raw and the body shivering. This too was said to discipline desire, to cleanse and harden the spirit. Some were placed on strict diets of plain bread and weak broth because it was believed that rich foods encouraged passion, while bland meals encouraged restraint. For those judged more severe, there were harsher remedies still. Electrotherapy became fashionable among certain physicians. Machines with coiled wires and brass dials hummed faintly as currents were sent through the body. The shocks might be applied to the spine, to the head, or even to the genitals. Each jolt delivered with the belief that pain could unlearn pleasure. Others experimented with hypnosis, lowering their voices into a steady, commanding rhythm, instructing patients to abandon their longings. They believed that suggestion could reshape the deepest layers of the self, that a man could be talked into desiring women, or a woman coaxed into longing for men. And in the darkest corners of the profession, there was surgery. Castration for men, the removal of testicles in the name of cure. Hysterectomy for women, the removal of the womb under the claim that the organ itself poisoned the mind. These operations, performed with chilling confidence, left patients scarred in body and spirit, their suffering presented as scientific progress. All of this was recorded with clinical precision in the ledgers of the age. Charts, observations, daily notes about behaviour, and appetite and compliance. What was not recorded, what could never be captured in ink, was the fear of the patients themselves, the slow erosion of their sense of worth, the loneliness of being told again and again that love itself was a disease. The Victorians believed they were building a more orderly, more moral society. But in their effort to pin every butterfly, to label every specimen, they turned living, breathing people into objects of study, stripped of dignity, stripped of love, and placed in cabinets of shame. The Victorians built many kinds of institutions. They built railway stations of iron and glass, where the new age of steam thundered into the heart of the cities. They built great museums, filled with fossils and statues, where curious minds wandered beneath vaulted ceilings. They built libraries, churches, town halls, all designed to reflect a sense of permanence and order. And among these buildings, quieter, more forbidding, sometimes perched on the edges of towns, sometimes looming over the countryside, they built asylums. These places were intended, at least on paper, as houses of healing, sanctuaries for those the world judged to be unwell. But to walk through their gates was to step into a different reality altogether, a world where medicine and punishment mingled so closely that it was often impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. If you were accused of homosexual acts in Victorian Britain, or if suspicions gathered against you, you might find yourself not only in front of a magistrate, but also in the hands of physicians. The law and the medical profession worked in tandem. Prison was one option, but an asylum could be another, especially if family influence, shame, or money pushed the case toward the path of treatment rather than simple incarceration. Picture the asylum corridors. The walls are tiled, their surfaces cold and echoing. The windows are high and barred, letting in a thin, reluctant light that makes the air seem grey even on a clear morning. The smell is sharp, a mixture of disinfectant, damp woolen clothing, and the lingering odours of illness. Patients move slowly through the halls, some shuffling under the weight of sedation, others silent, their eyes unfocused. Here, homosexuality was entered into ledgers as though it were madness. Doctors discussed it with the same clinical tone they might use for seizures, delusions, or melancholia. The language of compassion, words like cure and treatment, covered methods that were, in truth, deeply cruel. Sedatives were common, bottles of bromide solution, powders of chloral hydrate, draughts that were swallowed daily until the body sagged under their influence. These drugs dulled thought, blurred memory, drained vitality. A patient who was quiet, obedient, and slow was considered improved. The very signs of decline were mistaken for progress. Other treatments were harsher still. Cold water was a favoured tool. Patients were plunged into icy baths, left shivering until their teeth rattled, in the belief that such shocks would discipline the body and cleanse impure desires. Diets were controlled, stripped of flavour and richness, because it was thought that plain food produced plain instincts. Work was prescribed, often meaningless. Repetitive labour that exhausted the body until little energy remained for thought or longing. And then, for the wealthier patients, came the most modern inventions: electricity. Small machines with brass knobs and coiled wires hummed faintly as doctors applied electrodes to skin. Currents ran through muscles, sometimes through the temples, sometimes through the most intimate places. The idea was that pain might unteach pleasure, that shocks might correct what love itself had inscribed. Beyond the asylum walls, the law reinforced the same message. In 1885, the Labouchere Amendment criminalised what it called gross indecency. The phrase was vague enough that almost any suspicion, any whisper of a letter or a gesture could ruin a man's life. Oscar Wilde, whose wit delighted London drawing rooms, would one day find himself crushed beneath that amendment's weight. And sometimes the punishments overlapped. A sentence might begin in prison, with hard labour and isolation, and continue in the asylum, where doctors declared that the convict was not merely a criminal, but a patient in need of discipline. Thus, medicine became a softer mask for punishment, a way of presenting cruelty as therapy, of insisting that what destroyed a life was, in fact, intended to heal it. Imagine lying on a narrow iron bed in such a place. The room is spare, the blanket thin, your body is heavy with sedatives, your thoughts dulled by electric jolts, your spirit made smaller by the constant message that your deepest self is a sickness. Outside, the city continues, trains whistle, factories roar, carriages rattle past, but inside, you're being taught not just to obey, but to doubt your very right to exist. That message, that the truest part of a person could be erased with enough discipline, enough drugs, enough law, was perhaps the heaviest weight of all. As the 19th century crept toward its end, the world was filling with the language of science. Railways were racing across continents, telegraphs were carrying words faster than any horse could gallop, laboratories were bubbling with strange new chemicals that promised to reshape the future, and medicine, eager to dress itself in this new authority, began to claim not only the body but the very soul as its territory. Homosexuality, which the Victorians had already labelled an illness, now became an object of serious study. Doctors and scientists, wearing their black coats and carrying their notebooks, spoke not of sin but of pathology. They insisted that desire could be measured, corrected, redirected, that with enough study the human heart itself could be trained into obedience. One of the most fashionable methods was hypnosis. Imagine lying in a darkened room, the curtains drawn against the gaslit street, while a physician leans close, his voice low and rhythmic. He tells you to relax, to surrender, to open your mind. He speaks of proper desires, of duties to family and society. He suggests over and over that your longings will fade, that your body will respond only to what is normal. And when you wake, he assures you that progress has been made, though the shadows in your heart remain unchanged. When hypnosis failed, and it almost always did, doctors searched for other explanations. They began to speak of hormones, though the science of such substances was still in its infancy. Theories spread that the glands of the body controlled not only growth and strength, but also affection and passion. If those glands were faulty, they reasoned, then perhaps they could be removed. Thus some men were subjected to orchiectomy, the surgical removal of their testicles, in the hope that it would erase their inversion. Women, meanwhile, were sometimes given hysterectomies, their wombs taken under the claim that a diseased organ had poisoned their instincts. To us, these procedures seem unimaginably cruel, but in lecture halls filled with young medical students, they were presented as noble experiments, brave steps forward in the fight against degeneration. There were also drug regimens, elaborate prescriptions of aphrodisiacs or sedatives, designed either to redirect desire or to bury it beneath exhaustion. Jenny June, a transgender woman living in New York, wrote of these ordeals in her memoirs. She described doctors who promised cures through tonics and through electricity, who spoke kindly but treated her body as a laboratory. She endured drug courses that left her disoriented, electric shocks that left her trembling, whispered suggestions meant to rewire her very self. What she found was not healing, but a deeper wound, a knowledge that medicine could wound the spirit as easily as the flesh. And then there was Oscar Wilde, perhaps the most famous victim of this Victorian obsession with control. Wilde was not subjected to scalpels or electric wires, but to the full weight of law shaped by medical and moral panic. In 1895, after a series of trials that fascinated and horrified the public, Wilde was convicted of gross indecency under the Labouchere Amendment. His punishment was 2 years of hard labour. The sentence broke him. The man who had once filled drawing rooms with laughter, who had written plays sparkling with wit, now found himself scrubbing prison floors until his hands bled, eating bread too stale to swallow, locked each night into a narrow, cold cell. His health declined, his spirit fractured, and though he lived to leave prison, he never truly recovered. The society that once adored him turned away, and the rest of his life was spent in exile and sorrow. Though Wilde's punishment was legal rather than medical, the spirit behind it was the same. Whether through hypnosis, drugs, surgery, or the law itself, the goal was identical: to erase, to correct, to silence. The Victorians convinced themselves that love could be dissected like a muscle, trained like a dog, shocked like a faulty wire, or punished into submission. But all they truly accomplished was suffering, quiet, unseen and lasting. And as we move further into the century's twilight, what remains most haunting is not only the violence of the treatments themselves, but the calm confidence with which they were delivered, as if cruelty, spoken in the language of science, became kindness. When we read the casebooks left behind by Victorian doctors, what we see are lines of neat handwriting, carefully inked across thick paper. We see tables of symptoms, notes on dosages, observations of behaviour. We see charts, figures, sometimes even sketches of the machines used. What we do not see, what those records almost never reveal, are the faces behind the words, the eyes, the trembling hands, the silent despair of the patients themselves. Imagine, if you will, a young man, perhaps no more than 20 years old, the son of a respectable family. A letter has been discovered, or a friendship too close has been noticed, or a rumour has spread further than he imagined, and suddenly he is no longer simply a student or a clerk or a son. He is a patient, diagnosed with an inversion of instinct. He is brought to a doctor, perhaps even against his will, and told he can be helped. The doctor prescribes tonics, or sedatives, or long immersions in cold water. Each morning he is handed a draught of bitter liquid, and each evening he lies in bed shivering beneath a thin blanket, his body aching from treatments that leave him weaker with every passing day. Weeks turn to months. The young man who once laughed easily with friends now moves slowly, his gaze downcast, his speech quiet. His family visits less often, embarrassed by the shame of his condition. And in his journal, if he dares to keep one, there are fewer and fewer words, until the pages fall silent altogether. For some, the story ended even more abruptly. There were suicides in prisons, in asylums, in rented rooms where despair closed in like a fog. A rope, a razor, a bottle drained too quickly. These were the last cures for those who could no longer endure. But such deaths were seldom recorded honestly. They were written down as madness, as melancholia, as a sudden decline of health. The true cause, the crushing weight of shame, was erased, just as their lives had been. And yet, within this bleakness, there were faint, fleeting glimmers of compassion. A nurse who, seeing a patient tremble after a cold bath, quietly brought an extra blanket. A doctor, rare but not impossible, who chose to understate a case, to soften a diagnosis, to avoid harsher treatments. A friend who slipped a comforting letter past the watchful eyes of censors. These small mercies could not undo the harm, but they flickered like candlelight in an otherwise darkened room. For most, however, the system allowed no escape. Medicine and law worked together like two hands of the same body, one punishing, the other pretending to heal. The result was the same: lives diminished, spirits broken, identities erased. Even those who survived in body carried invisible scars. They left asylums and prisons with their health weakened, their confidence destroyed, their memories filled with shame. Many never spoke of what they endured. Some married, hoping to bury the past beneath a respectable life. Others withdrew into solitude, living quietly on society's edges, never daring to share their truth again. What makes this history so chilling is not only the obvious cruelties, the jolts of electricity, the drugs poured down unwilling throats, the scalpels wielded with cold precision. It is also the quiet, insidious violence of persuasion, the steady insistence that love itself was an illness, that desire itself was wrong. Day after day, treatment after treatment, patients were told the same thing: that they were broken, that they needed fixing, that their most intimate truths were a disease of the mind. And over time, many of them came to believe it. The shadow of that message lingered long after the treatments stopped, long after the asylums released them. Respectability was everything in Victorian society. Families prized their good names above all else. Appearances mattered more than private truths. And so, behind the lace curtains, behind the polished brass doorknobs, lived countless invisible tragedies, men and women whose lives were slowly erased. Not through death alone, but through silence, concealment, and the slow erosion of self. In the stillness of night, when the lamps burned low and the streets fell quiet, how many must have lain awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the doctors were right, wondering if they were indeed diseased, wondering if they might ever be whole. History, as you know, never ends when a calendar page turns. The year 1900 arrived with fireworks and optimism, with promises of a new century, with the sense that the old world was giving way to progress and modernity. But the shadows of the 19th century did not vanish with the chiming of midnight bells. They lingered, carried quietly into the decades ahead, reshaped by new languages and new technologies, yet still recognizable to anyone who had lived through the Victorian age. The notion that homosexuality was a sickness had taken firm root. Doctors of the 20th century inherited the same assumptions as their predecessors. They no longer spoke quite so often of inversion or degeneration, but they used new words: disorder, maladjustment, psychosexual abnormality. And with these new labels came new methods of treatment. Psychoanalysis, the great invention of Sigmund Freud and his followers, became a fashionable tool. Freud himself was more cautious than many. He did not insist that homosexuality was curable, but he framed it as a developmental deviation, something that could, in theory, be redirected. And so, across Europe and America, patients lay upon couches while doctors sat in high-back chairs, asking endless questions about childhood, about parents, about hidden fears. Hour after hour, week after week, patients spoke of dreams and memories, and doctors told them their desires were the product of wounds in the past, that with enough analysis, those desires might wither away. Compared to icy baths or surgical knives, this may sound gentle, but for many it was a subtler cruelty, because it suggested, over and over, that the love they felt was not real love at all, but merely a symptom, a mistake, a distortion. And to be told such a thing softly, repeatedly, in the quiet of a consulting room, could leave wounds that cut just as deep as the scars of surgery. Yet the harsher methods did not vanish. Doctors still reached for electricity, still believed in the power of shocks to condition the body. They still reached for drugs, now armed with new chemicals, stronger sedatives, injections of hormones. In Britain, even in the middle of the 20th century, men convicted under laws first shaped in the Victorian age were sometimes offered a choice: imprisonment or chemical treatment. And so it was that Alan Turing, the brilliant mathematician who helped crack the Enigma code during the Second World War, who shortened that war and saved countless lives, found himself prosecuted in 1952 for gross indecency. Given the choice between prison and medical treatment, he chose the latter, perhaps believing it would be the lesser punishment. The treatment was chemical castration, doses of synthetic hormones that altered his body, weakened his health, and plunged him into despair. 2 years later, Turing ended his own life, a half-eaten apple beside him. A century after Wilde, another genius was lost, another life consumed by the belief that love was a disease. Elsewhere, doctors continued to experiment. Some returned to hypnosis, confident they could persuade the mind to abandon its longings. Others pursued behavioral conditioning, pairing electric shocks with the showing of photographs, hoping that pain would create disgust where affection once lived. Each of these was presented as modern, scientific, compassionate. Each of them carried the same old cruelty. The language changed, the uniforms changed, but the chain that stretched from the Victorian asylum to the modern clinic was unbroken. What is most haunting, perhaps, is the confidence with which these methods were practiced. Doctors wrote papers, gave lectures, spoke on radio programs, convinced not only themselves but society at large that they were helping. And all the while, in their consulting rooms and laboratories, they left behind a trail of shattered lives, broken bodies, and quiet despair. And yet, through all of this, love endured. It endured in whispered conversations, in letters carefully hidden, in friendships that deepened into something more. It endured even when it had to remain invisible, even when it could not be spoken aloud. It endured because it was never a sickness, never a mistake, never a weakness. The world, however, took a very long time to understand that. The story of the Victorian gay cures is, in the end, not really a story about medicine. It is a story about fear and about power. It is the story of a society so anxious to preserve its appearance of order and respectability that it was willing to wound its own people, to cut and drug and silence them, simply for daring to love differently. The asylums have emptied now. The great stone corridors that once echoed with footsteps and keys have fallen into quiet ruin. The tiled wards smell only of dust and time. The ledgers, once filled with neat notes about patients and treatments, lie forgotten in archives, their ink fading slowly into yellowed paper. The physicians who prescribed bromides and cold baths and electric shocks have long since passed into the ground. But the memory of those who endured, those who swallowed the bitter tonics, who lay trembling under shocks of current, who carried scars both visible and unseen, that memory remains. It lingers in stories half told, in family silences, in diaries hidden away for decades. It lingers in the long shadows cast by lives never lived fully, loves never spoken aloud, and dreams quietly abandoned for the sake of survival. And yet, history is never only darkness. For even in the midst of repression there were always moments of resilience. Lovers who found one another in secret but with fierce devotion. Friends who offered quiet solidarity, knowing that a kind word or a gentle look could mean more than 1,000 sermons. Individuals who, despite everything, refused to believe they were broken, who carried their truth quietly through the years until the world began, slowly, to change. To remember this past is not to surrender to despair. It is instead to honour the strength of those who lived through it, to whisper across the centuries to them, "You were never sick, you were never wrong. It was the world that failed you." As you lie here now, in the safety of the present, let the images of that darker time fade gently. Let the cold baths drain away. Let the bottles of laudanum vanish back into their chests. Let the electric wires fall silent, their crackle extinguished. Let the prison doors close behind us forever. In their place, imagine something softer. Imagine a world lit not by gas lamps, but by the steady glow of compassion. Imagine love not as a disease to be cured, but as a gift to be cherished. Imagine every hidden life, every silenced voice finally stepping into the light, finally welcomed as whole. This world is not yet perfect. It is still being built. But night by night, memory by memory, we shape it by remembering the cruelties of the past and by choosing in the present to do better. So rest now, dear listener. Let history settle like a quiet snowfall, soft and still. Let the weight of those old sorrows slip from your shoulders. Close your eyes and know that you are safe, that you are seen, that you are not alone. Tomorrow will come, as it always does. But tonight you may rest, carried gently by the truth that love endures, love outlasts, love survives. Good night. Hello there. Settle in and get comfortable. Dim the lights and let the soft hum of the night be your companion. We're going to travel back in time, not with a roar and a flash, but with a whisper. We are going to a world not so different from our own, but one where secrets were as common as the cobblestones on the street, and love was a quiet, hidden act of rebellion. This is a story about the quiet, hidden lives of people who found love and belonging in the shadows of Victorian England. It's a tale of courage, a little bit of magic, and the stubborn, persistent hope that light always finds its way. Imagine waking up in a small, rented room in 1891. The gaslight outside casts a flickering amber glow on your ceiling. The wallpaper, a faded floral pattern, seems to come alive and then fade back into shadow with each flicker. The air is cool, carrying the faint, distant scent of coal smoke and wet earth. The day doesn't begin with a bell, but with a quiet, internal checklist. You lie in the narrow bed, the starched sheets a little scratchy against your skin, and you listen. Every sound is a signal. The distant clatter of a milk cart, a dog barking down the street, the first heavy footsteps of the landlady stirring downstairs. Each creak of the floorboards above and below is a potential whisper of danger, a question about your whereabouts, a judgment waiting to be passed. This isn't paranoia. It's simply the way of things. It's the constant low-level thrum of a double life. Did you remember to hide your diary? It's not just a book of thoughts, but a book of treason. Its pages are filled with coded prose, a name disguised as a flower, a meeting place described as a fictional journey. You visualize it, tucked away behind a loose brick in the back of the fireplace, wrapped in a scrap of oilcloth to protect it from the soot. Is the note you received yesterday from a dear friend just one line, a promise of a future meeting, safely burned? You can still smell the faint, acrid smoke from the match you used. These are the small, daily rituals of survival. Your room is a cozy, clever sanctuary. It is more than just a place to sleep. It is a fortress of the self. Every object has a purpose beyond the obvious. Your hat box, sitting neatly on top of the wardrobe, holds not just your Sunday bonnet, but also a ribbon, a few letters pressed into the folds of a silk scarf, and a scrap of poetry hidden amongst a list of mutton recipes. The poem is a lifeline, a tangible link to a soul who understands you. The letters are a testament to connections that exist outside the confines of the world. You wash your face and hands with cold water from a chipped pitcher, the shock of the temperature a brief, sharp reminder that you are here, now, awake. You practice a neutral expression in the cloudy glass of the mirror. A smile might be too much, inviting questions about its source. A frown might invite sympathy, or worse, suspicion. The morning is a silent performance, a delicate daily dance of blending in. Part 2. The silent performance. As you head to the communal breakfast table, you listen to the chatter around you. The weather, the price of tea, the Queen's latest appearance in the newspapers. All around you, conversations are happening, but your mind is on a different frequency. You listen for a word, a phrase, a name. You are an expert at reading between the lines, at hearing the quiet pauses and the meaningful glances that tell the real story. The conversation at the table is a carefully constructed facade, a social game where the rules are known and the stakes are high. You might find a moment of connection in this space. You might catch the eye of someone across the table, their smile a little too understanding, their gaze lingering just a moment longer than it should. In that quiet moment, in the shared understanding that passes between you, you find a bit of comfort. You're not alone. The day is just beginning, and you've already found an ally. The outside world, with its loud, insistent demands, is a place you navigate with caution. A visit to the grocer, the simple act of buying a loaf of bread, becomes a test of your resolve. Do you look the clerk in the eye? Do you speak too loudly or too softly? It's a world where every gesture is measured, every word is weighed. The rigid social hierarchy of the time, the suffocating expectations of gender and class, create a web of norms designed to trap those who dare to step outside of them. Even a visit to the doctor is a risk. Your cough is not the real concern. It's the symptoms of inversion he sees. Medical journals of the time are full of bizarre theories, suggesting that unnatural affections can be caused by everything from too many pears to a lack of boiled beef. You're offered tonics that taste like disappointment and lectured on the dangers of poetry and overstimulation of the imagination. You leave with a prescription for cod liver oil and a renewed sense of caution, knowing that your best defense is to simply blend in, to become as unremarkable as the wallpaper in your room. Part 3. The secret language. In this world, a language of flowers and fans helps hearts speak the truth. A bouquet of violets is more than a lovely arrangement. It's a message, a secret whispered in petals. A single pansy says, "You occupy my thoughts," and a forget-me-not can begin a forbidden affair. The florist shop is a place of covert operations, and every well-mannered home has a floral dictionary, its pages turned not for botanical knowledge, but for the deeper meaning hidden between the stems. And then there are fans, quick, silent, and expressive. A brisk flutter can mean "I'm interested," while a sharp snap signals danger. In this silent, subtle world, a simple gesture can be a lifeline. These are not merely codes, they are a shared culture, a way of signaling to each other that you are part of a hidden community. It is a beautiful, intricate ballet of communication, a testament to the human need to connect, no matter the obstacles. For those who live a secret life, every day is a performance, By day you may be a quiet clerk or a dutiful governess, but as dusk falls, a transformation begins. The city's gaslights glow softer now, casting long, dramatic shadows. The ordinary world begins to recede, and a hidden one comes to life. You swap your ordinary clothes for something with a flash of colour, a sprig of lavender in your buttonhole, or a silk scarf. You move through a hidden world of secret knocks, passwords, and private gatherings. Maybe it's a poetry reading, a private dinner, or a dance in a back room where laughter is a little too loud, and eye contact a little too meaningful. For a few precious hours you live in colour, sharing stories with people who understand the careful balance you strike between your two lives. In these rooms, in these quiet corners, you are not a performance. You are simply yourself. Part 4. The ever-present threat and the small victories. The risk is always present. A careless word, a misplaced letter, these could unravel everything. The newspapers, with their love of scandal, are a constant threat. Their sensationalist headlines a stark reminder of the consequences of being discovered. Your diary is your biggest liability and your greatest treasure, a book of secrets written in coded prose and hidden behind a loose brick in the wall. You may have to invent a cousin in Paris to explain your love of French poetry or a fictional fiancé to ward off nosy neighbours. But not every story ends in tragedy. The world is full of small acts of kindness that shine like a beacon in the dark. These are the moments that prove not everyone buys what society is selling. There's the landlady who pretends not to hear the second set of footsteps on the stairs, the grocer who accepts your payment from your cousin without question, the maid who returns your book of Sappho poetry with a knowing nod. These little moments of complicity are lifelines. They are proof that compassion can quietly exist in the cracks of a rigid world. You learn to cherish these small victories, for they are the mortar that holds your world together. They remind you that humanity, in its best and most humble form, can create small pockets of light in the deepest of shadows. Part 5. The Enduring Legacy. This is a story about the stubborn, hopeful hearts that beat in the shadows of history. It's a story of finding family not through blood, but through secret glances and shared smiles. It's a story of survival, of laughter in the face of fear, and of loving fiercely against all odds. Their courage helped build a path to the world we live in now. The secret poets, the midnight dancers, and the quiet rebels of the past are not ghosts of a bygone era. They are our ancestors, and their legacy is the freedom we enjoy today. Their struggle, their fear, and their defiance were not in vain. So, as you drift off tonight, remember them. Rest easy, knowing your secrets are safe, your blankets are warm, and your love, whatever shape it takes, is a story that has always deserved to be told, and one that has always found a way to survive. Sweet dreams. Many people romanticize Victorian courtship, picturing stolen glances across ballrooms, passionate love letters, and gentlemen proposing on bended knee. But for most, it was a terrifying gauntlet of bizarre rules, awkward encounters, and social landmines that could ruin your entire future. Dating wasn't about finding your soulmate. It was about not accidentally getting engaged to a stranger because you mishandled a handkerchief. So yeah, if these stories sound interesting to you, subscribe. And I'm curious, what time is it where you are? Last week, someone from Canada mentioned they listened during lunch breaks. Not judging, just wasn't expecting that. We're heading back to Victorian England in a minute. First, though, get comfortable. Seriously, take a second. Adjust whatever needs adjusting. You won't want to move once we get started. Your eyes flutter open in London, 1875. The first thing that hits you is the weight. Something heavy is pressing down on your ribs, squeezing your waist like you're being slowly crushed by a python. You take a shallow breath, that's all you can manage, and realise you've woken up in a corset. And not just any corset, but one cinched so tight you can feel your organs rearranging themselves to make room. Miss Elena, please hold still. We must have you looking perfect today. That's your lady's maid Agnes, currently attempting to compress your waist to the fashionable 18 inches. You're 21 years old, it's your third season in London, and if you don't secure a husband soon, you'll be well on your way to spinsterhood. Unlike your comfy bed back in 2025, you're perched on the edge of a wooden chair in your dressing room, gripping the sides as Agnes performs what can only be described as socially acceptable torture in the name of beauty. Your mother insists you look your absolute best today, Agnes continues, giving the laces another brutal tug. Lady Harrington's tea is very important. I hear Mr. Blackwood will be in attendance. You stifle a groan. Mr. Blackwood, the latest in your mother's parade of suitable matches. He's wealthy, from a good family, and about as interesting as watching paint dry. But he's eligible, and in Victorian England, that trumps personality every single time. I spent a concerning amount of time researching Victorian matchmaking for this story, and let me tell you, dating apps might be a hellscape, but they're nothing compared to the Victorian marriage market. Courtship in the 1800s was basically a real-life game of chess where one wrong move could ruin your entire life. Agnes, you whisper, must the corset be so tight? I could hardly breathe at Lady Pembroke's ball last week. Your mother says a gentleman doesn't want a wife who eats more than a bird, Agnes replies, not easing up one bit. Now, let's get you into your dress. The dress. A pale blue morning gown with enough layers to clothe a small village. The wire cage crinoline underneath keeps the skirt extended in a perfect bell shape. It looks elegant, but feels like you're wearing a prison. You can't sit properly, can't move quickly, and can't even use the bathroom without a major operation. Not that a proper Victorian lady would ever admit to having bodily functions. The marriage market. Your one and only career. For women, marriage was essentially their career. A bad match could mean a lifetime of misery with no escape. Divorce was nearly impossible, incredibly scandalous, and usually left women destitute. The stakes were impossibly high. Your mother has been up since dawn, Agnes says, arranging your hair. She's determined to see you engaged before the season ends. You know what she isn't saying. Your younger sister is waiting her turn to be introduced to society, and having two unmarried daughters doing the rounds at the same time would be both expensive and slightly embarrassing. You're taking up space in the marriage market. Time to move inventory. Picture this. The Victorian marriage market was literally called the season. It ran from April to August when Parliament was in session. Aristocratic and upper-middle-class families would pack up from their country estates and head to London for months of strategically planned social events. The entire purpose? To throw young women and men together in carefully supervised settings so they could find suitable matches. Miss Elena, your mother wants to review your dance card before we leave, Agnes says, pinning the final strands of your hair into place. The dance card was a little booklet attached to your wrist by a ribbon where gentlemen would pencil in which dances they'd reserved with you. A full dance card meant you were popular. An empty one meant you were failing miserably, dating by way of public performance and immediate visible judgment. Fun dot. Agnes, what if I don't want to marry Mr. Blackwood or any of Mother's choices? Agnes looks at you like you've suggested flying to the moon. Miss Elena, she says quietly, what choice do you have? And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because in Victorian England, particularly for women, choice wasn't really part of the equation. The goal was marriage, preferably advantageous marriage, and the entire society was structured around making that happen. A debut, a dress, and a dossier. The coming-out process had nothing to do with sexuality and everything to do with announcing, "Hello, world, I'm officially on the marriage market." For upper-class girls, this meant being presented at court, literally curtsying before the Queen to signal your debut into society. It was essentially a royal stamp of approval saying, "This one's ready for breeding." Your coming out had been 3 years ago. You remember standing in a line of nervous girls in white dresses with feathers in their hair, waiting to curtsy before Queen Victoria herself. One girl actually fainted. Nobody helped her until after her presentation was complete. Priorities. You look beautiful, Miss Elena, Agnes says, stepping back to admire her work. You stare at yourself in the mirror. You do look beautiful, in the Victorian sense. Pale skin, achieved by staying indoors, a tightly corseted waist, and elaborately styled hair. You're a perfect product, packaged and ready for market. When you head downstairs, your mother is waiting in the drawing room, already dressed in her visiting clothes. She looks you up and down with the critical eye of a livestock judge at a county fair. Elela nena, dear, turn around. You do a slow spin, and she nods approvingly. The blue brings out your eyes. Mr. Blackwood mentioned he favours blue. Of course he did, and of course she remembered. Your mother has been collecting information on eligible bachelors like she's building a dossier for the Secret Service. Mother, you begin carefully. I was thinking perhaps I might spend some time in the library today instead. Don't be ridiculous, she cuts you off. Lady Harrington has specifically arranged for several eligible gentlemen to be present. It would be most impolite to decline. Translation: get in the carriage, we're going husband hunting. The carriage ride to Lady Harrington's is uncomfortable, both because of your corset and the lecture your mother delivers on proper tea etiquette. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't laugh too loudly. Don't eat too much. Don't sit too close to a gentleman, but also don't be standoffish. It's like trying to navigate a labyrinth blindfolded. And remember, your mother says, as the carriage pulls up to the impressive townhouse, Mr. Blackwood is heir to a considerable fortune. His family owns property in both Kent and Yorkshire. You nod dutifully. Property in Kent and Yorkshire. How thrilling. How romantic. The art of controlled conversation. The footman helps you down from the carriage, and you follow your mother up the steps to Lady Harrington's home. Inside, the drawing room is already filled with people, mostly women in elegant dresses with a strategic sprinkling of eligible bachelors. The men look as uncomfortable as the women look determined. It's a battlefield disguised as a tea party. Mrs. Pembroke, Miss Pembroke, how delightful! Lady Harrington swoops down upon you, air-kissing your mother and examining you with sharp eyes. Elanina, my dear, you look positively blooming. Come, there are several people you simply must meet. And so it begins. You're paraded around the room like a prize heifer, introduced to a series of gentlemen who all blur together in a sea of side whiskers and polite bows. You make the same small talk about the weather, the season, the latest performance at the theatre. You are careful to seem intelligent enough to not be dull, but not so intelligent as to be threatening. Let me tell you about the Victorian rules for conversation between unmarried men and women, because they're gloriously, hilariously specific. A proper young lady couldn't just start chatting with a man she didn't know. She had to be formally introduced by a mutual acquaintance. Even after an introduction, physical contact was strictly limited. No touching, and definitely no hugging. A gloved hand might be offered for the briefest of handshakes or to be escorted into dinner. Miss Pembroke. A deep voice breaks into your thoughts, and you turn to see a tall man with dark hair and impressively bushy sideburns bowing slightly. I believe we met at Lady Westmorland's ball last month. Henry Blackwood at your service. So this is the famous Mr. Blackwood. You curtsy in response, noting that he is at least better looking than your mother had led you to believe. Not that it matters. His personality could still be as dry as last week's toast. Mr. Blackwood, you respond. How lovely to see you again. I trust you are enjoying the season thus far, he asks, and you launch into the expected script of polite conversation. The thing about Victorian dating is that it was almost impossible to get to know someone properly before marriage. All your interactions were supervised, and all your conversations were limited to approved topics. You were basically expected to decide if you wanted to spend your entire life with someone, based on how well they made small talk about the weather, and whether they could dance a proper quadrille. Would you care to take a turn about the room, Miss Pembroke? Mr. Blackwood asks, offering his arm in a perfectly proper manner. You nod and place your hand lightly on his arm, careful to maintain the appropriate distance between your bodies, close enough to converse, far enough to prevent any improper contact. Your mother, you notice, is watching like a hawk from across the room, a satisfied smile on her face. I understand you enjoy reading, Miss Pembroke, Mr. Blackwood says, as you stroll slowly around the perimeter of the room. May I ask what authors you prefer? You hesitate. This is a trap. If you name something too intellectual, you risk seeming blue-stocking-ish, a term for overly educated women who are considered unmarriageable. If you name something too frivolous, you risk seeming empty-headed. Better to aim for the middle ground. I enjoy Jane Austen, you reply, which is both true and safe, and some poetry. Excellent taste, he nods approvingly. I myself enjoy Sir Walter Scott and Wordsworth. And thus begins the delicate dance of trying to gauge compatibility through the most constrained conversation imaginable. It's like trying to assess someone's entire personality by watching them select produce at a grocery store. Good luck with that. The stakes are high, the choices are few. May I be so bold as to request the honour of calling on you tomorrow afternoon, Miss Pembroke? Mr. Blackwood asks as your circuit of the room nears completion. This is significant. A gentleman requesting to call means he wants to visit you at home. Still chaperoned, of course, which indicates serious interest. Your mother will be ecstatic. I would be delighted, you respond, because what else can you say? The rest of the tea passes in a blur of cucumber sandwiches, lukewarm tea, and stilted conversation. By the time you and your mother return home, your face hurts from maintaining a pleasant expression, and your ribs are screaming for release from the corset. Mr. Blackwood was quite attentive, your mother says, practically glowing with satisfaction, and he's requested to call tomorrow. I knew the blue dress was the right choice. Yes, mother. It was definitely the blue dress that sealed the deal, not the substantial dowry you'll bring to the marriage, or the advantageous connection between our families. He seems nice, you offer, which is about as enthusiastic as you can manage. Nice, my dear? He's perfect. Excellent family, substantial means, and still under 30. You couldn't ask for a better match. You couldn't ask for much of anything in Victorian dating, that was kind of the point. Silent signals and secret languages. Here's the wild thing about Victorian courtship. The rules were so rigid, so formalised, that people had to develop elaborate workarounds just to communicate basic human feelings. Because you couldn't just say, hey, I like you, or actually, I think you're as boring as wallpaper paste. Instead, you had entire silent languages, the way you held your fan, how you wore your gloves, where you placed your calling card, all to try to convey messages you weren't allowed to speak aloud. Agnes, please help me out of this dress, you say, once you're back in your room. I can hardly breathe. As Agnes unlaces your corset, you take your first deep breath in hours. The relief is immediate and intense, like finally getting into your comfy clothes after a day in uncomfortable business wear, but 1,000 times more extreme. Mr. Blackwood seemed quite taken with you, Agnes comments as she hangs up your dress. Your mother believes he might propose before the season's end. The thought sends a chill through you. Marriage to Mr. Blackwood, a man you've spoken to for perhaps a total of 30 minutes, always under supervision. A man whose true character, interests, temperament, and habits you know absolutely nothing about. Yet, you're expected to entrust your entire future to him. That night, as you lie in your bed, a four-poster with heavy curtains that can be drawn for warmth and privacy, you stare up at the canopy and consider your options. They are, unfortunately, limited. You could refuse Mr. Blackwood if he proposes, but that would mean continuing on the marriage market, enduring more seasons, more teas, and more awkward conversations with strange men. Your parents would be disappointed, possibly angry. Society would begin to wonder what was wrong with you. Or you could accept, securing your future but tying yourself forever to a man you barely know. There was a darkness to Victorian dating that the romantic novels don't show you. People made desperate choices because the alternatives were worse. Women, especially, had few options outside of marriage. No real career prospects, limited education, and often no independent income. Is it any wonder that Victorian literature is filled with disastrous marriages? They were basically playing relationship roulette with the highest possible stakes. A walk in the park, a test of wills. The next day, Mr. Blackwood calls at exactly the appropriate hour. Not too early to seem eager, not too late to seem disrespectful. He's shown into the drawing room where you wait with your mother, who has strategically arranged herself at the far end of the room, close enough to chaperone, far enough to give the illusion of privacy. Miss Pembroke, he bows, you look lovely today. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, you curtsy in return. Won't you sit down? He takes a seat across from you, maintaining a proper distance. Your mother pretends to be engrossed in her embroidery, but is clearly listening to every word. I trust you're well? He asks. Very well. "Thank you," you reply. "And yourself?" "Quite well." An awkward silence falls. This is the problem with Victorian dating small talk. There are only so many polite nothings you can exchange before you run out of approved topics. "I was wondering," Mr. Blackwood says finally, "if you and your mother might do me the honour of accompanying me to the botanical gardens tomorrow. The weather promises to be fair. A public outing, another step in the courtship progression." Your mother looks up from her embroidery, beaming. "We would be delighted," she answers before you can speak. "Wouldn't we, Elena?" "Yes," you say, because again, what choice do you have? That sounds lovely. Mr. Blackwood stays for exactly the appropriate amount of time, not so short as to be rude, not so long as to be presumptuous, before taking his leave with another bow and a promise to call for you at 2 o'clock tomorrow. As soon as he's gone, your mother is by your side, practically vibrating with excitement. "A walk in the gardens, my dear. He's clearly smitten. I wouldn't be surprised if he speaks to your father within the month." "Mother, I've barely spoken to him," you protest. "I hardly know him at all." She pats your hand condescendingly. "Nonsense. Your father and I were engaged after 3 meetings. That's how it's done in proper society. You'll have a lifetime to get acquainted after you're married." The Victorian approach to marriage compatibility was wildly different from ours today. We worry about emotional connection, shared values, and whether someone's Netflix preferences are compatible with ours. Back then, it was all about social standing, financial security, and family connections. Actual personal compatibility was considered a nice bonus if it happened, but certainly not a requirement. That night, as Agnes helps you prepare for bed, she notices your distracted expression. "Troubled thoughts, Miss Elena?" she asks, brushing out your hair. "Agnes, do you think it's possible to marry for love in our world, or is it always just a business arrangement?" Agnes's hands pause briefly before resuming their work. "I think," she says carefully, "that love can grow where it's planted, but the soil must be right first." Translation: Sure, you might eventually fall in love with Mr. Blackwood, but first make sure he's not going to leave you penniless or treat you badly. You climb into bed, your mind still spinning with thoughts of tomorrow's outing and what it might mean for your future. The mattress is stuffed with horsehair, the luxury option in Victorian times, and your sheets are fine linen. But despite these comforts, sleep feels distant. In the quiet darkness of your bedroom, you wonder what Mr. Blackwood is thinking. Is he lying awake too, contemplating a future with you? Or is he simply checking off boxes on his list of requirements for a suitable wife? Does he care about your thoughts, your dreams, your desires? Or just your dowry and family connections? You'll likely never know. That's the tragedy of Victorian dating. 2 people making life-altering decisions based on the barest acquaintance, both wearing masks of propriety that hide their true selves. It's a system designed to create matches, not happiness. As you finally drift towards sleep, your last thought is of tomorrow's garden walk and what new steps in this elaborate courtship dance it might bring. The rules are clear, the expectations set. All that remains is to play your part in this carefully choreographed performance and hope that when the music stops, you find yourself in a partnership you can endure, if not enjoy. The language of fans, flowers, and handkerchiefs. Your body sinks deeper into your modern mattress as you think about how different dating is today compared to Victorian times. How lucky we are to be able to actually get to know someone before committing our lives to them. How fortunate to have choices, independence, and the freedom to express our feelings directly instead of through elaborate codes and signals. The morning of your garden outing dawns bright and clear. Your stomach is in knots, not from excitement, but from the sheer weight of expectations. Yesterday, your mother spent 3 hours coaching you on proper garden walking etiquette, as if strolling through flowers requires specialized training. "Agnes," you whisper, as she tightens your corset for the day. "What if I trip and fall into a rose bush? Mother would never recover from the shame." Agnes snorts, then quickly composes herself. "Miss Elena, just remember to keep a proper distance from Mr. Blackwood, and for heaven's sake don't touch anything without your gloves." Ah, yes, the gloves. In Victorian England, bare hands were practically considered obscene. A proper lady never ever went outdoors with naked hands. The physical barrier of fabric between your skin and the world was just one more way to maintain that precious proper distance between yourself and potential suitors. As Agnes helps you into your walking dress, a slightly less formal outfit that still requires a corset, petticoats, and enough fabric to upholster a sofa, you notice her slipping something into your small handbag. "What's that?" you ask. "Your fan," Agnes says with a meaningful look. "The ivory one with the painted birds." "Of course. Your fan." That seemingly innocent accessory was actually the Victorian woman's secret weapon. I found this amazing book at a museum gift shop, once that translated the Victorian language of the fan, and holy crap, it was basically Morse code with wrist flicks. Museum guides will tell you that women use these signals to communicate secretly with potential suitors across crowded rooms, all while looking perfectly proper. "Remember what I taught you," Agnes murmurs as she arranges your hair. "The fan is your voice, when your lips must remain silent." Agnes had been the one to teach you the secret language of the fan, knowledge passed down from lady's maid to lady's maid, a covert communication system developed by women who had no other way to express their true feelings in public. "Drawing it across your cheek means—" Agnes quizzes you. "I love you," you respond automatically. "Twirling it in the right hand, I wish to be rid of you. Resting it on your right cheek?" "Yes, left cheek." "No." Agnes nods approvingly. "Good. Use it wisely." You almost laugh at the absurdity of it all. Here you are, a grown woman, having to resort to elaborate fan movements just to say yes or no to a man. But that was Victorian dating for you. All about indirect communication, hidden messages, and plausible deniability. When the maid announces Mr. Blackwood's arrival at precisely 2 o'clock, you and your mother descend the stairs with practiced grace. He stands in the foyer, top hat in hand, looking every inch the proper Victorian gentleman. "Mrs. Pembroke, Miss Pembroke," he bows. "I've brought the carriage. Shall we?" The handkerchief telegraph. The carriage ride to the botanical gardens is silent and awkward, with your mother sitting between you and Mr. Blackwood like a human chastity belt. When you arrive, Mr. Blackwood helps first your mother, then you down from the carriage, careful to touch only your gloved hand and only for the briefest moment. The gardens are beautiful, filled with exotic plants from across the British Empire. As you stroll along the gravel paths, your mother deliberately slows her pace, allowing you and Mr. Blackwood to walk slightly ahead, still within sight, but with the illusion of privacy. "I must say, Miss Pembroke," Mr. Blackwood begins, "you look particularly lovely today." "Thank you, sir," you respond, keeping your eyes modestly lowered. "I've been meaning to ask, do you enjoy music? I myself am quite fond of the pianoforte." Are these probing questions about shared interests, the Victorian equivalent of "what's your favourite Netflix show?" "I do enjoy music," you reply, "though I play only tolerably well." "I should very much like to hear you play sometime," he says, and there's a warmth in his voice that wasn't there before. Is he actually interested, or just going through the motions? It's impossible to tell through the thick veil of propriety that covers every interaction. This is when the fan comes into play. As you walk, you open your fan and begin to fan yourself slowly. According to the secret code, this indicates "I am married," which is obviously not true, but you're curious to see if Mr. Blackwood knows the language. His eyes flick to your fan, then back to your face, a slight frown creasing his brow. So, he does know the code. Interesting. You switch tactics, closing your fan and drawing it across your cheek. "I love you." His eyebrows shoot up in surprise. "Miss Pembroke," he says, his voice slightly strained. "Are you feeling quite well? Perhaps the sun is too strong for you." You suppress a smile and switch signals again, this time resting the fan against your left cheek. "No." Now he looks thoroughly confused. "Perhaps we should find some shade," he suggests, clearly trying to make sense of your contradictory messages. The thing about the language of the fan is that it was never standardized. Different etiquette books published different meanings for the same gestures. What meant "I love you" in one guide might mean "leave me alone" in another. It was a communication system designed for miscommunication. I once read this absolutely bonkers Victorian etiquette guide from 1870 that listed over 20 different fan signals, each with a specific meaning. The author claimed it was the secret language understood by all ladies of quality. But then I found another guide from the same year with completely different interpretations. No wonder everyone was confused. As you continue walking, your mother catches up, perhaps sensing that something unusual is happening. "Ah, the orchid house," she exclaims. "Shall we?" Inside the humid glass structure, exotic orchids bloom in a riot of colours. It's beautiful, but the real attraction is a moment when your mother becomes distracted by a particularly unusual specimen, and you find yourself momentarily alone with Mr. Blackwood behind a large palm. "Miss Pembroke," he says quietly, "I confess I'm having trouble interpreting your signals." So he does know the fan language. You feel a blush creeping up your neck. "I was merely cooling myself," you lie, closing your fan with a snap. "Of course," he nods, but there's a twinkle in his eye that suggests he doesn't believe you for a second. "Though if I may be so bold, if you wish to communicate with me, perhaps words would be clearer than other methods." Is he teasing you? That seems impossibly forward for a Victorian gentleman. But before you can respond, your mother reappears and the moment is gone. The fan wasn't the only secret communication system in the Victorian dating arsenal. There was also the language of flowers, where each bloom carried a specific message. A red rose meant love, of course. But did you know that yellow carnations meant, "You have disappointed me," or that striped carnations meant, "I cannot be with you"? As you exit the orchid house, a flower seller at the garden gate catches your eye. She's offering small posies for sale, little bunches of mixed flowers tied with ribbon. On impulse, you pause. "Would you like one, miss?" the woman asks, holding out a particularly pretty arrangement of daisies and forget-me-nots. Before you can answer, Mr. Blackwood steps forward. "Allow me," he says, purchasing the posy and presenting it to you with a slight bow. You accept with a curtsy, aware that this small exchange is laden with meaning. A gentleman giving a lady flowers is a significant step in courtship, and these particular flowers, daisies for innocence and forget-me-nots for true love, carry their own message. Did Mr. Blackwood choose this specific posy on purpose? Does he know the language of flowers as well as the language of fans? Or was it simply the prettiest one available? "How thoughtful, Mr. Blackwood," your mother approves, watching the exchange with hawk-like attention. And then there's the handkerchief, another seemingly innocent item loaded with secret meaning. You've tucked one into your sleeve, as every proper lady does. Dropping it accidentally on purpose is a classic move to attract a gentleman's attention. As you continue your walk, you deliberately let your handkerchief slip from your sleeve to the ground. Mr. Blackwood immediately notices. "Miss Pembroke, you've dropped your handkerchief," he says, bending to retrieve it. Now comes the crucial moment. How he returns it will indicate his interest. If he simply hands it back, he's being polite but not particularly interested. If he presses it to his heart before returning it, he's declaring his affection. Mr. Blackwood does neither. Instead, he tucks the handkerchief into his coat pocket with a smile. "I believe it's customary for a gentleman to keep such a token, is it not? With your permission, of course." Your mother looks like she might faint from joy. This is practically a declaration of intent in Victorian terms. "Yes," you manage to say, your face burning. "You may keep it." Congratulations. You've just engaged in the Victorian equivalent of changing your Facebook status to "in a relationship." Look, I'm not making this stuff up. Victorian people wrote actual guidebooks on handkerchief flirting. I found this one journal from 1867 that published a whole system called the handkerchief telegraph. It had signals like drawing it across the lips meant, "I desire your acquaintance," and letting it rest on the left cheek meant "no," while the right cheek meant "yes." The journal even warned that these signals should only be used at balls, parties, theatres, and on the street, but never in church, because apparently God draws the line at handkerchief flirting. The modern gaze on a brutal system. By the time you return home from the gardens, you're exhausted, not from physical exertion, but from the mental gymnastics required to navigate Victorian courtship rituals. Every gesture, every word, every glance has been calculated and analysed for hidden meaning. "Well?" your mother demands as soon as Mr. Blackwood has taken his leave. "What did you think of him?" "What can you say?" That you spent most of the outing sending mixed signals with your fan just to see if he understood them. That you're still not sure if he chose those flowers randomly or with specific intent. That you now have one fewer handkerchief but no better understanding of the man who might become your husband. He seems kind, you offer, which is about as enthusiastic as you can honestly be. Kind, your mother exclaims. He's perfect. Did you see how he kept your handkerchief and those flowers? I wouldn't be surprised if he speaks to your father by the end of the week. That sends a jolt of panic through you. So soon, but you've had exactly 2 proper conversations with the man. Mother, surely that's too quick. We hardly know each other. She waves away your concern. Nonsense. Your father and I were engaged after 3 meetings. That's how it's done in proper society. The Victorian timetable for courtship could be alarmingly fast by modern standards. Without the luxury of casual dating or getting to know someone over time, decisions had to be made quickly, often based on very limited information. Later that evening, as Agnes helps you prepare for bed, she notices your troubled expression. Was the outing not to your liking, Miss Elelanena? She asks, brushing out your hair. Agnes, how can I possibly decide if Mr. Blackwood would make a good husband? I know nothing about him beyond his manners and his fondness for the pianoforte. Agnes sighs. That's why we have the language of fans and flowers and all the rest, to try to discover a person's true nature when society won't let you ask directly. But it's also confusing, you protest. I tried using the fan signals today, and I think I just confused him. Agnes can't help but laugh. The problem with secret languages, Miss Elelanena, is that not everyone reads the same dictionary. That night, as you lie in bed, you think about the day's events, the fan signals, the flowers, the handkerchief. You're a product on a shelf, and Mr. Blackwood is a potential buyer. He's a good match on paper, but you're still not sure if he's the right person for you. But in Victorian England, that wasn't a choice you got to make. You'll never know if he's the man he pretends to be, but you do know that you have to make a choice, and that choice will determine the rest of your life. Makes swiping left seem pretty easy by comparison, doesn't it? Gather round, little one, and settle in. Tonight, we're going to travel back in time to a world of lace, tea, and very, very straight spines. It was a place called the Victorian era, and in this world, manners weren't just about being polite. They were a bewildering and beautiful secret code. Imagine you're not a child in your comfy bed, but a young lady visiting the parlour of a distant, very proper aunt. You've been told to sit up straight, hands folded just so, and never let your back touch the chair. Why? Because in this strange world, posture wasn't just a detail, it was destiny. The unbreakable rule of the spine. You sit with your spine as straight as a ruler, your hands demurely folded in your lap, shoulders back and chin gently tucked. You dare not lean back, for that would suggest laziness, and crossing your legs is simply scandalous. Stretching is for animals, not for proper ladies. In this time, your body spoke before you did. A straight spine showed discipline, poise, and good breeding. Bad posture was deeply suspicious, a sign of moral or spiritual failure. Mothers trained their daughters early, balancing books on their heads during sewing lessons. Some homes even had special posture-correcting chairs, wooden nightmares with no back support that forced you to sit upright for hours while embroidering something you would never use. This scrutiny followed you everywhere, from carriages to churches to ballrooms. Imagine walking into a party where every mother is secretly grading your vertebrae. The way you walked was just as important. You must glide, not march or shuffle. Your feet were meant to barely lift off the floor, toes pointed forward, with your heels making no sound. It's said that some girls were even fitted with backboards, stiff wooden devices strapped to the torso to correct curvature, which felt more like a medieval torture device than a fashion accessory. And here's where it gets especially odd. The obsession with posture wasn't just about beauty, it was a link to your health too. Physicians claimed poor posture squished your organs and ruined your femininity. Yet, despite the importance of a straight spine, corsets, those rib-crushing, lung-collapsing monstrosities, were still the norm. It's a special kind of irony to be judged for bad posture, while your entire torso is being cinched to the width of a baguette. You learn to keep your back rigid even when your emotions are not, practicing smiling without slouching, sitting without sinking, existing without offending. And you realize your spine wasn't just about bone alignment, it was about social alignment. Yours had better match theirs, or else. Generations of women grew up to suffer chronic back pain and pinched nerves, all in the name of respectability. Still, even in the face of absurdity, some found quiet resistance. They added extra padding to their dresses to look more upright or bravely, gloriously, just slouched when no one was looking. Because sometimes survival meant pretending to care about decorum while secretly giving your spine a break. The secret language of the fan. You're getting used to this, aren't you? Your posture is still perfect and your hands are folded just so, but your fingers twitch slightly, reaching for the small folding fan nestled beside your teacup. This fan isn't just for keeping cool, it's your only weapon in this parlour battlefield, and you wield it not for heat, but for communication. In the Victorian world, you weren't allowed to say what you actually thought, so you spoke with a fan, a delicate, fluttering, ostrich-feathered lie detector. This wasn't just dainty flirting, it was a full-blown code system, a tactical espionage tool disguised as an accessory. Speaking openly to a man was scandalous, but passing him a secret message with a flick of your wrist? Perfectly acceptable, as long as no one else caught it. The fan had a whole glossary. Dropping your fan meant we shouldn't be seen together. Snapping it closed quickly meant leave me alone. Resting it against your right cheek meant yes. The left cheek? No. Slowly drawing it across your eyes meant forgive me, and if you covered your heart with it, I love you. Subtlety was survival. Fans were the secret messages of their day. This was a form of power too. In a world where you couldn't vote or own property, a fan was your Morse code, your stylish defense mechanism. And fans were not cheap. A fine lace fan imported from France could cost a small fortune. So not only were you learning a secret language, you were expected to perform it with a fragile piece of artisan craftsmanship. Drop it, break it, and you weren't just clumsy, it was symbolic, like dropping your reputation right onto the parquet floor. The fan wasn't the only accessory under this heavy social microscope, but it was one of the few that gave women a quiet form of power. It's a clever, fluttering rebellion against the very rules it lived within. Women weren't allowed to speak their minds, but they could whisper with silk and feathers. And you wonder how many grand romances, secret affairs, or polite rejections happened without a single word spoken. Finally, picture this. You're at your last ball of the season. You see him across the room, the one you meant to send signals to all week. You try again. A glance, a flutter, a flick. Maybe he catches it, maybe he doesn't. But you hold your fan high, composed, unreadable, because even if you're boiling inside a gown with 37 buttons, you still know how to say everything without saying a word. The pocket crisis. You're getting used to the fan, sort of. At least it gives your hands something to do while you try not to commit the next major faux pas. Tonight's weird etiquette trap is hiding right beneath your skirts, or rather not hiding, because tonight we talk about pockets, or the infuriating lack thereof. You may think a pocket is just a place to stash your lip balm, but in the 1800s pockets were a political statement. Here's the problem. You don't have any. Not real ones, not like the men do. In the 1700s women used to have pockets, big ones too, tied around the waist under layers of skirts. But by the time Queen Victoria took the throne, dresses got tighter, skirts more sculpted, and the idea of cutting a hole in your carefully constructed gown just so you could carry your stuff. Outrageous, indecent even. A visible bulge where a lady stored her handkerchief was simply unthinkable. So you're left with nothing. Or worse, you're told to carry a reticule, a tiny decorative handbag the size of a fig. It's dainty and holds approximately 3 things: a coin, a calling card, and the weight of your crushed autonomy. Historians still debate whether this shift was an accident of style or a deliberate act of control. Some suggest that by depriving women of a place to carry items, society kept them more dependent. After all, if you can't carry money, how far can you really go? And so here you are, invited to tea across town. You need a handkerchief, a comb, a key, but you have nowhere to stash it. You have to ask your brother, or worse, your maid. It's not just inconvenient, it's absurd. Men's clothing, by comparison, is a veritable storage system with waistcoat pockets, coat pockets, and secret inside pockets. They're practically portable filing cabinets. And what do you get? A decorative pouch tied with a ribbon, of course. But women, as they tend to do, got creative. Some kept money in their gloves, others stitched hidden pockets into petticoats. One particularly rebellious trick involved sewing tiny compartments inside corsets. The broader truth, however, was stark. You weren't trusted to carry your own stuff. You had no access, no freedom to act without preparation. It's worth noting that this nonsense didn't go unchallenged. As the century progressed, suffragettes made functional pockets for women, part of their broader demand for rights. "It has pockets" has become a modern war cry, a tiny victory shouted from department store fitting rooms. So tonight, as you fumble for your comb, take a moment to appreciate the sheer absurdity of it all. You live in a world where an entire gender had its carrying capacity surgically removed by a society obsessed with control disguised as fashion. And maybe, just maybe, you tuck a small stone into the hem of your gown, not for use, just to know it's there. The glove gauntlet. You're standing by the doorway, ready to step outside, but something's wrong. You forgot your gloves. Panic sets in, because in the Victorian world, showing up somewhere with bare hands isn't just awkward, it's practically a declaration of social war. Gloves weren't a fashion choice, they were armour. Etiquette demanded them, society enforced them, and scandal lurked in the fingers of the gloveless. Here's the deal. If you're leaving the house, you're wearing gloves. Visiting someone? Gloves. Shopping? Gloves. Attending a funeral, a wedding, a tea party, or a dramatic reading of Tennyson? Gloves. And not just any gloves. The fabric mattered, the length, the colour. Daytime meant light cotton or soft suede. Evenings demanded opera gloves, long, tight, and uncomfortable enough to make your fingers consider mutiny. There were rules, dozens of them. You remove your right glove when shaking hands. You never eat with your gloves on, but you don't remove them the moment you enter a room. You wait until the appropriate social cue, usually once your hostess has done it first. Historians still debate whether glove rules were about hygiene, modesty, or just a clever way to keep women busy and confused. To touch bare skin was intimate, scandalous even. A man touching a woman's hand without gloves could ignite a flurry of gossip. A gloved handshake was proper. A bare one was practically a marriage proposal. And yet, gloves weren't just barriers, they were stage props. A lady might accidentally drop one, knowing full well a gentleman would dive to retrieve it. That tiny scrap of fabric would become a relic, but fine gloves were expensive, and if a glove ripped in public, you'd better hope it was your non-dominant hand. Exposed knuckles were social suicide. Gloves were also associated with morality. "She's no better than a woman who walks around bare-handed," someone might whisper. Gloves became metaphors for purity and good breeding. To remove them in public was like peeling away propriety. It's no wonder gloves became a favourite prop in novels, usually right before the scandal chapter. So here you are, walking into your aunt's parlour 5 minutes late, hoping no one notices your gloveless state. You keep your hands close to your skirts, maybe you pretend to be chilled, but deep down, you know what the room is thinking. What else has she forgotten? Her modesty? Her morals? Her marriage prospects? It's ridiculous, and yet you feel it, that tiny anxiety, that flutter of shame, all from 10 fingers and no gloves. So next time you slip your hand into a warm glove on a cold morning, spare a thought for your Victorian counterpart. She wasn't just keeping her hands warm, she was keeping her dignity intact, one stitch at a time. The calling card gauntlet. You've survived the glove crisis, bravo, but don't relax just yet. You're now standing outside the home of a Mrs. Hartford Smith, the air thick with the scent of lavender and social anxiety. You're not here for fun. You're here for a calling, a ritual more complicated than chess, and about as enjoyable as doing your taxes in a corset. Welcome to the dizzying etiquette of Victorian visiting cards. These weren't just paper, they were your entire social resume, reputation, and personal brand distilled onto a little rectangle of cardstock. It had to be creamy, tastefully engraved, with no colours, no frills, and absolutely no scent. This was not a love note. This was diplomacy. And you're not just here to say hello. You're performing an elaborate social dance where one wrong move, a premature knock, a misfolded card, can doom your reputation for a full season. You reach into your tiny card case and extract a card with your gloved fingers. You hand it to the maid. Now, here's where it gets interesting. You don't get to walk in. Oh no. If you're not expected, you leave your card at the door, literally. This is leaving one's card, and it is Victorian for just checking in to make sure I'm still part of your acceptable friend tier. Sometimes you fold the top left corner to indicate you're calling in person and not just dropping by. A folded bottom corner meant condolences. An edge turned under meant congratulations. There were so many tiny signals on these cards they might as well have come with subtitles. If your card is accepted and you're invited in, congratulations. You now have to navigate the actual visit. This means entering a drawing room like you're made of lace and self-doubt, perching on the edge of a settee, and preparing for 15 minutes of intense performative civility. No more, no less. Staying too long is rude. Leaving too soon is worse. You must speak politely about the weather or the Queen's latest headache while pretending you're not here purely out of obligation. You may not talk politics. You may not talk religion. You may certainly not talk about how bored you are. Laughter is allowed, but only gently, only with a handkerchief ready. The loud kind of laughter, the one that might suggest joy or confidence, is for taverns and men. Even the storage of these cards was strategic. Most genteel homes kept a silver tray in the entry hall where guests would deposit their cards, and because appearances were everything, some families would fluff up the tray with old cards to make it seem like they were more in demand than they actually were. That's right, people faked popularity using decorative litter. So as you step back into your carriage, tucking your gloves properly and faking a grateful smile, remember this. In the Victorian world, relationships weren't built with conversations. They were built with paper, polish, and precisely folded corners. And you'd better hope yours said exactly what you meant. The seating hierarchy. You've survived the calling card gauntlet, bravo. But don't relax just yet. You're now at a proper dinner party and everyone is gliding to their assigned seats like human chess pieces. Tonight, the battlefield is the dining room and your weapon is chair placement. Welcome to the world of seating hierarchy, where your social worth could be measured in inches from the host's elbow. First off, you do not choose your seat. No, the hostess does. She arranges the seating in advance with the seriousness of a military campaign. The head of the table is sacred territory. The host and hostess sit at opposite ends. To their immediate right and left are the guests of honour. If you're lucky enough to land a spot near them, congratulations. You're interesting this week. If you're seated near the foot of the table, well, you probably sneezed too loudly at the last garden party. This isn't just dinner, it's a social audit. Your seat tells everyone how the hostess ranks you. Closer means favoured, farther means forgettable. And if you're seated next to someone unpleasant, that's not an accident. It's a message. Now, if you're unmarried, your seating comes with even more layers. Young ladies are often placed strategically near eligible gentlemen, but not too close. That would be obvious. You're expected to sit, glide, and smile all at once. When your seat is pulled out, you must lower yourself in one fluid motion. No thuds, no shifting. Your back never touches the chair. Your ankles must remain side by side, hidden under your gown like a secret you'd never dare share. And here's a quirky detail. Women never sat down before the hostess. Ever. You wait until she sits, then you follow her cues. She sneezes. You politely bless yourself. When it comes to conversation, you're only supposed to talk to the person on your left during the first course, then the one on your right for the second. This alternates like a silent, formal dance. This rule was particularly stressful if you happen to be seated next to someone dreadfully boring, like Major Fortescue, who only talks about pigeons. But here's the kicker. This seating ritual was about stability. With so many rules in play, nobody could cause trouble without it being painfully obvious. A young man trying to flirt too boldly with a debutante? Impossible. He's stuck 3 seats down, forced to chat with her cousin. So you learn to endure, you smile, and you pretend not to notice the whispered comment about your gloves. You fold your napkin just right and you wait, because in this room, silence is strategy, seating is status, and the dinner hasn't even started yet. The perilous stairs. The dinner is over, and your corset is staging a full-blown rebellion. But just when you think you've made it through the evening without social injury, your hostess rises and says, "Shall we take a turn about the drawing room?" Oh no. It's happening. You're going to have to walk in public with people watching, and worse yet, there are stairs. Victorian staircase etiquette was less about architectural navigation and more about avoiding moral collapse, because somehow, even walking up a flight of stairs could be suggestive if you weren't careful. Here you are, a lady in a gown with 13 pounds of petticoats, and you must ascend with the grace of a duchess on a cloud. Behind you is a gentleman, and this is where things get delicate. In proper Victorian society, a man was never supposed to ascend the stairs directly behind a lady. That would mean he'd be at eye level with her ankles, or worse, her calves. And in this deeply paranoid social ecosystem, that was akin to gazing directly at her inner thoughts. Scandalous. Indecent. The result was that staircase protocol became weirdly specific. The man either had to hang back awkwardly, or if he was bold, go up first so he couldn't ogle anything he wasn't supposed to. It was like a duel of chivalry. After you. Oh, no, I insist, after you. I couldn't possibly. But I might see your shoes. Exactly. And speaking of shoes, those were another problem. Women's hemlines were long, but stairs made them treacherous. One wrong step, and the whole skirt could hike up just enough to flash a glimpse of stocking. So women learned to glide, holding their skirts just high enough to avoid tripping, but not so high that anything suggestive peeked out. You were expected to climb stairs like you weighed nothing, as if gravity itself admired your breeding and decided to ease up a bit. Descending stairs was a different kind of danger. Going down meant your face was visible, but you had to look at the steps, not the people watching. Eye contact while stepping down could be interpreted as boldness, and you never offered your hand unless you stumbled, in which case the appropriate gesture from a gentleman was to catch you and immediately apologize, as if he had done something wrong. It's all about appearances and control. But of course, rebellion existed. Daring women, the rebellious kind who didn't wait for a chaperone at every stairwell, who marched up stone steps without a single glance behind. These were often American women, scandalously independent. British society tolerated them, barely, but only because they were assumed to return home eventually. So back to you. Your foot touches the final stair. You've made it. Your skirt stayed in place. Your gloves didn't catch, and the gentleman behind you stared at the banister like his life depended on it. You step gracefully into the drawing room. One more etiquette obstacle conquered. The handkerchief's secret language. You've survived the stairs barely. But now you're perched once again on the edge of a too-small sofa, sipping tea that tastes like boiled patience. Conversation drifts around you, and you're politely pretending to care. But inside your sleeve, your hand is twitching. Tucked there is your secret weapon, your coded companion, your delicate, damp defender, the handkerchief. In Victorian society, a handkerchief wasn't just a square of fabric, it was a communication device. Folded, dropped, fluttered, or twirled, it sent messages more scandalous than the average dinner party ever dared to voice. The language of fans might have been dramatic, but handkerchiefs were low-key dangerous. Let's start with the basics. Everyone had one, some people had dozens. A lady never blew her nose audibly, that was considered ghastly. A gentle dab at the nostrils was permitted, barely, and only with grace. But beyond the sniffles, handkerchiefs were coded tools. Held neatly in the left hand, it meant, I'm awaiting your approach. Twirled absent-mindedly, I'm bored. Dropped by accident in front of a gentleman, that's no accident, that's bait. And if he picks it up and hands it back with a meaningful glance, well, now it's a courtship. Historians still argue how widespread this handkerchief language really was. Some claim it was just a literary flourish. Others believe women really did master these signals as a workaround to their voiceless roles. After all, when society says you can't speak first, you find other ways to get your message across. Lending someone your handkerchief was an intimate gesture, more intimate than a handshake. Lending it to a man meant something. Accepting one from a man was practically a contract. But sometimes it was weaponized. Think of the passive-aggressive sniff, the carefully timed dab of a dry eye during a dramatic reading. One woman reportedly caused a full household rift by accidentally leaving her lace-trimmed handkerchief on a rival's chair, embroidered with a monogram that wasn't hers. Handkerchiefs also had sentimental weight. They were kept in memory boxes pressed between pages of love letters. They were handed down mother to daughter as tokens of femininity and restraint. They absorbed more than tears. They absorbed history. And then there was the mourning handkerchief, black-edged, starched and thick with symbolism, used in funerals and periods of grieving that could last for years. So tonight, as you tuck your handkerchief back into your sleeve, carefully folded, scented with rosewater, and embroidered with just the right degree of subtlety, you know its power. It is protection, expression, and sometimes even defiance. And tomorrow, when you see him again, you just might drop it on purpose. The moral compass on your head. It's a new morning. A fresh breeze flutters the lace curtains. You, meanwhile, are locked in your bedroom in a state of absolute panic. Why? Because your hair is wrong. Victorian hair etiquette wasn't just about curls and combs. It was a full-time moral compass perched on your scalp. Your hair says everything before your mouth gets a chance to say anything at all. Hair was sacred, literally. It was tied to virtue and emotional state. Wild hair meant a wild woman. Perfectly coiled ringlets meant modest, well-raised, and just the right amount of repressed. You were expected to wear your hair up, always, unless you were under 13 or mourning. Letting your hair hang loose as a grown woman was reserved for the deeply ill or the artistically unhinged, and your hair had to be styled thoughtfully, tastefully, laboriously. Enter the pins. So many pins. You will spend at least half an hour each morning twisting your hair into a soft yet structured arrangement that looks effortless but requires a small engineering degree. Buns, braids, coils, and the occasional Grecian knot were all in fashion, but not too high. Showy, not too low, slouchy. Somewhere near the back crown of the head seemed safe. Of course, the materials mattered. Hairbrushes with natural bristles, tortoiseshell combs, ivory pins. Hair oil was a must, rose-scented preferably. A greasy sheen was in. Dry hair meant neglect, or worse, poverty. And let's talk about hair washing, or more accurately, the lack thereof. Weekly hair washing wasn't common because water was a production. Instead, they brushed a lot, 100 strokes a night. It wasn't just vanity. It was believed to stimulate the scalp, distribute oils, and prevent moral decay. The truly unhinged part? Hair as a keepsake. Victorians loved to gift locks of hair. Romantic partners exchanged curls tied with ribbon. Mothers snipped baby curls to keep in lockets. Mourning jewellery, bracelets, brooches, even full wreaths were made from the braided hair of the deceased. It's equal parts touching and morbid. And speaking of mourning, hair rules got even more complicated if you were grieving. For a widow in deep mourning, elaborate hairstyles were frowned upon. You wore your hair low and simple, possibly veiled. You were to look solemn, but still tidy. But here's the twist. Some women loved it. Hair was one of the few aspects of appearance they could control. It was private and public, yours but also society's. And within the tight confines of acceptable style, some found creativity. They developed signature twists, subtle ways to signal rebellion, or at least distinction. And there were outliers. Women who wore their hair shockingly short or scandalously loose. The papers fainted, but the next season the soft fringe bob became a quiet trend among younger ladies. So now, as you adjust the final pin, smooth the last flyaway, and glance one last time in the mirror, you breathe deep. Your hair is perfect, quietly dignified, not too interesting, not too plain. Just enough to earn polite nods from the other ladies, because in the end your hair doesn't just sit there, it speaks. And tonight it says, I know exactly what I'm doing, even if you absolutely, definitely do not. The perilous laugh. You've managed your hair, your gloves, your calling cards. You've climbed the stairs with grace and survived the dinner seating chart unscathed. You're practically royalty until you laugh. Just a little chuckle, a tiny well-earned burst of amusement at Lord Batten's absurd opinion that cucumbers are naturally spicy, and suddenly the room shifts, heads turn, eyebrows twitch, a silence heavier than your bustle settles in, because tonight, dear friend, you have committed the crime of improper laughter. Victorian women, you see, were expected to express amusement the way one might react to a particularly tasteful doily, with quiet, composed appreciation. Anything louder than a mild titter, dangerous. Loud laughter was unladylike, undignified, and worst of all, vulgar. A lady should cover her mouth, not hide her face like a ninja, but delicately, as if catching a butterfly of amusement before it flutters away. The volume must stay low. The eyes can sparkle but not roll. The shoulders may shake slightly, but any indication of a real body involved in the laugh is unthinkable. Etiquette books offered actual instructions on how to laugh. You were to be mirthful, not boisterous, amused, not gleeful. No open mouths, no toothy grins, a smile that lingers. Charming. A giggle that echoes. Dreadful. It wasn't just laughter itself, it was who you laughed at. Making fun of someone above your station dangerous? Laughing with someone of higher status? Risky. Mocking anyone in the room? Utterly off limits. Most safe? Laughing at yourself as long as it was gentle and didn't imply actual self-awareness. Victorian men, by contrast, were encouraged to laugh. Roaring with laughter over port and roast beef was positively masculine. But women were to receive humour, not contribute to it. To laugh gently, or not at all. This disparity didn't go unnoticed. Some women turned it into an art. They mastered the mirror laugh, reflecting the amusement of their companions without betraying what they actually thought. It was emotional ventriloquism. You never laughed first. You never laughed louder. You laughed socially, not emotionally. But the real danger was in laughter that sounded like joy. You laugh loudly and people assume you are bold. Bold becomes brash. Brash becomes dangerous. And suddenly your name is being mentioned in the same breath as actresses, American heiresses, and worst of all, suffragists. It's no wonder that in some private gatherings, women's laughter was still restrained, but genuine. A brief reprieve where they could be human for 15 minutes between tea refills. So now, as you sit on that too small sofa, eyes sparkling but lips barely parted, you release a laugh. Soft, polished, palatable. It floats out into the parlour, lands gently on the floral rug, and disappears. You've passed. But just once, when no one's looking, you allow yourself a real one. Sharp, loud, joyful, and utterly forbidden. The houseguest's ballet. The parlour has quieted, the fire is down to a polite flicker, and the guests are beginning their elaborate goodbyes. But you? You're staying the night. A guest in someone else's home. A delicate situation requiring supreme grace, silent footsteps, and a well-packed overnight bag. Because in the Victorian era, being a houseguest wasn't just about showing up with flowers and a toothbrush. No, you were expected to perform a hospitality ballet, a precise, exhausting, utterly baffling set of rituals known as guest etiquette. Let's start with your arrival. You never just drop in. You send a note in advance requesting permission to visit. Once inside, you are no longer entirely human. You are a guest, which means you must be delightful, undemanding, and eternally grateful, even if the bed is lumpy and the wash basin smells faintly of mothballs. Your bags are taken up by a servant, and you're led to your room. There's a pitcher of water, a comb you probably won't use, and a bell pull cord that you are absolutely terrified to touch. What if you summon someone by accident? So you don't touch it. Then comes the guest book. Many homes kept one, a large leather-bound tome in which you are expected to write your name, date of arrival, and perhaps a sentiment like, "So honoured to be among such dear friends." Anything less than syrupy flattery marked you as ungrateful. You don't compliment the food too much. Doing so implies surprise, as if to say, "What delicious roast partridge." Sounds like, "I didn't expect this dump to serve edible game." So you keep it modest. So agreeable, you might murmur. Quite a pleasing texture. Food is not about pleasure, it's about civility. The rest of the day is structured. Morning walks, reading in the drawing room, maybe croquet if the host is feeling whimsical. And you are expected to participate. Declining an activity without a very good excuse is considered rude. And what if you want privacy? Hilarious. You have none. Your room may not lock, and Victorian houses, for all their grandeur, were often draughty and creaky. Everyone hears everything, so you tread lightly, cough discreetly, and do not slam doors under any circumstances. And when it's time to leave, you do not simply pack and go. You must say goodbye to every member of the household, leave a final note or small token for your hostess, and express hope that you have not disturbed the serenity of her home. There's even a belief that overstaying your welcome brings misfortune. 3 nights is civility, said one etiquette book. 4 invites fate. So you time your departure with surgical precision, and once you're gone, the host will definitely talk about you. She was punctual to breakfast. He walked too heavily. Her boots left a mark. These aren't just comments, they're votes on whether you'll be invited again. So, as you climb into the carriage, gloved hands folded, hat perfectly centered, you allow yourself a breath of relief. You didn't break anything. You didn't overstay. You didn't get caught humming in the hallway. You were the perfect Victorian guest, even if you secretly hate croquet. Letters, ink, and silent secrets. You've returned from your house visit, gracefully declined a 3rd slice of boiled pudding, and your hair still smells faintly of someone else's lavender soap. But before you can collapse in a grateful heap, you remember you've got to write letters, and not just any letters, proper ones. Because in the Victorian world, communication wasn't just about saying the right thing, it was about writing the right thing with the right ink on the right paper, folded the right way, sealed with the right wax, and scented with the appropriate level of tragedy. Your writing paper must be cream or pale blue. A subtle monogram is acceptable, provided it doesn't scream, "I designed this myself with dreams of grandeur." Envelopes, ungummed. You seal them with wax, of course. And yes, there is a correct wax for every occasion. Bright red is romantic, black wax is for mourning, blue is for friendships. Your ink must be black or dark blue. Violet is flirtatious, and green ink, as we've noted, is for rebels and poets. But now you add your secret ingredient, scent. Some women dip their letter paper in rose water or orange blossom before drying it flat between books. Others dabbed perfume on a separate sheet and slipped it into the envelope as a scented decoy. A letter that smelled faintly of lavender was familial. One dabbed with violet was romantic. Gardenia, bold, jasmine, suggestive, musk. Now you're playing with fire and everyone knows it. And then there was what you wrote. Victorian letter writing was emotional ballet. Every line had layers. "I trust this finds you in good health" could secretly mean, "I've been thinking of you at odd hours." You might reference an object. "The book you lent me has been a fine companion," as a code for, "I'm not entirely over our last conversation." The letters could be read aloud, so whatever you wrote needed to withstand public scrutiny. Many women even drafted their letters on scrap paper first, editing for tone and margin alignment. And once your letter is perfectly crafted, you fold it in thirds, tuck it into the envelope with the writing facing inward, then melt a bit of sealing wax and voila. One socially safe communication ready to be delivered. But what about letters you receive? You wait. Responding too quickly makes you look overeager. Waiting too long makes you seem aloof. The sweet spot? 3 to 5 days. One fringe favourite technique involved warming the envelope slightly before delivery, enough to awaken the perfume and ensure it hit the recipient right in the nostalgia. Of course, the risk of discovery was high. Imagine your brother accidentally warming your letter to dry a raindrop, and suddenly learning that you think Lady Bovington's wig is shaped like a confused hedgehog. So tonight, as you tuck your final folded missive into its envelope, seal it with wax and whisper, "Please don't fall into the wrong hands," you feel a flicker of satisfaction. Because in a world where speaking too freely was dangerous, writing became an act of quiet rebellion. And your rebellion smells faintly of lavender and heartbreak. The chair-warming scandal. You've written your letters, and you're back in the drawing room for another polite social gathering. The tea is tepid, and Lord Pelham is once again attempting to explain why the Crimean War was good for morale. You need to sit down desperately, but you can't. Not in that inviting armchair by the hearth, because it's still warm. Welcome to the bizarre social phenomenon of chair warming, and why Victorian women had to be hyper-aware of where and when they sat. In polite society, sitting in a warm seat, especially one recently vacated by a man, was considered vaguely inappropriate. Why? Because it suggested intimacy, bodily heat, presence. In a world that flinched at the sight of an uncovered wrist, the lingering warmth of someone's posterior was just too much. This rule, of course, applied mostly to women. Men could plop into any seat without much thought. But for women, the etiquette was layered, awkward, and full of potential peril. Say a gentleman had been sitting in the window seat. He stands up to fetch tea. The seat is now vacant, yes, but it is also contaminated. You, the observant and ever so proper lady, must now wait. How long? Enough for the chair to cool, a few minutes at least. It gets worse. If you do sit down, and someone notices, a raised eyebrow, a glance between friends, a note made for future gossip. Miss Trenworth sat in Sir Edmund's chair, still warm, shameless. Historians are divided on whether this rule was widespread or more of a fringe fixation, but either way, the implications were real. A woman's relationship to furniture wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. Even the act of claiming a chair was tricky. You were supposed to hover politely, perhaps float by, and happen to rest when someone insisted. And if a gentleman offered you a seat, you were to hesitate, protest once, maybe twice before accepting. Too eager, and you risked seeming forward. The goal was to appear as though you were doing him a favour by allowing yourself to be seated. And let's not forget how you rose from a chair. Not too fast, you might seem startled. Not too slow, you might seem reluctant. You pressed your gloved hands on the armrests, leaned slightly forward, and rose as if lifted by an invisible string. If your skirts swished, fine. If anything got caught in the upholstery and required tugging, ruinous. So now, back to you. You're hovering, carefully scanning the room. That chair by the fire is empty, but it was occupied moments ago by Captain Frobisher. You decide to wait, casually perch on the edge of a nearby footstool, and smile serenely. You are neither so bold as to invade a man's warmth, nor so fragile as to collapse without cushioning. You're a woman of elegance, of restraint, of internalized seating anxiety. And when another chair opens, fully cooled, socially neutral, with just the right balance of form and fabric, you glide into it with the poise of someone who spent her entire life preparing for this exact moment. The parlour tightrope. You've claimed your seat with all the grace of a duchess on a cloud and managed to fold yourself into it without flashing a single petticoat ruffle. Your posture is textbook, but now you've reached the most treacherous terrain in the Victorian household. The parlour. This wasn't just a sitting room. It was the social proving ground, the place where reputations were built, broken and embroidered over. As you cross the threshold into the parlour, you're already being observed. You must greet the hostess first, always. A simple nod won't do. You need a slight curtsy and a few pleasantries like, "What a lovely arrangement of rhododendrons." Then if the room is full, you must select your spot carefully. The parlour is socially zoned like a chessboard. Near the fireplace is where the older ladies gather. By the piano, young hopefuls. Near the window, dangerous, too exposed to scrutiny. You find a spot on a love seat that already has a chaperone, a friendly matron perched on one side. Perfect. You're immediately seen as respectable and not lurking for flirtation. Then begins the parlour dance. Small talk. Not real talk, not opinions, not honesty. You might discuss the weather, the most recent charity fete, or a recent sermon. But the second you drift toward controversy, say the Irish question, or even a bold thought about Mrs. Montgomery's new bonnet, you've overstepped. You nod more than you speak. You laugh gently. You speak only when spoken to, unless you're introduced and prompted with a question. It's not a conversation, it's a performance of harmony. And then there's the piano, the parlour's crown jewel and its greatest curse. If you play, you must pretend not to want to. The hostess may say, "Won't you favour us with a piece?" You must demur at least once. "Oh, I'm out of practice," but refuse a third time and you risk looking like a killjoy. When you finally sit, you play something modest, a light waltz, a Chopin prelude, something to say, "I am educated, but not. I'm auditioning for the Paris Conservatoire." The most dangerous subject of all? Men. You do not bring up a gentleman unless he's royal, dead, or both. Even referencing your own brothers or cousins too frequently could be seen as a subtle way of parading connections. And heaven forbid you mention a gentleman's appearance. One innocent remark about someone's shoulders, and suddenly you're branded as bold. So tonight, as you sip your imaginary tea and nod along to a very tedious discussion about corn yields, you know exactly how to survive. You ask polite questions, you feign interest, and when someone dares to say something real, you pause, smile, and offer them a lifeline. How about those rhododendrons this year? The ankle scandal. So you've learned how to sit, speak, walk, and even blink like a lady of impeccable Victorian decorum. But what if, in a moment of unguarded impulse or gasp, curiosity, you wanted to speak to a man alone, in private? Well, you couldn't. Welcome to the unnerving realm of the Victorian chaperone system, where no interaction between a proper young lady and a gentleman could be left to chance. If you wanted to talk to a man, you needed a witness, a buffer, a walking, breathing embodiment of social caution. Your chaperone, your mother, your older sister, or a vigilant aunt, had one job: to observe, redirect, and if necessary, intervene. Unsupervised conversations between unmarried men and women were potential ticking scandals. A 5-minute chat on a park bench could fuel weeks of gossip. A walk in the garden without a third party. You may as well start planning the wedding or the exile. The rules were stiflingly clear. If a gentleman called upon you, he did so in the presence of your family. If he wrote to you, the letter was often read aloud by a third party first. If you met him in public, you could only speak if introduced, and never for longer than it takes to comment on the weather. If he invited you anywhere, the answer was always a polite no. This system either protected women or imprisoned them. Some say it gave women the protection they needed in a society obsessed with appearances. Others claim it was a method of control, ensuring every interaction could be monitored and judged. A lax chaperone was just as scandalous as an unattended girl. If Mrs. Southworth allowed her niece to speak to the curate for more than 10 minutes, people started asking, why? But the system wasn't entirely without cracks. Some clever women used their chaperones as cover. You might plan a walk through the park, and while your chaperone pauses to admire swans or lament the decline of moral poetry, you exchange quick words or even a handkerchief with your suitor. This was risky, thrilling, and often the only way to advance a relationship beyond polite weather commentary. So tonight, as you imagine yourself in your prim walking dress, you glance to your left. There she is, your chaperone, watching, waiting, ready to protect you or prevent you, depending on the moment. And you realize every step you take is shadowed not by danger, but by a very polite, very firm, very unshakable presence. The dance card and the waltz. You've withstood the chaperones, the language of lace, and the perilous world of conversational restraint. But now it's time to enter the true Colosseum of Victorian etiquette, the ballroom floor. In the Victorian era, a dance wasn't just a dance, it was a statement, a strategy, a public declaration of alignment and interest. It began with the dance card. You arrive at the ball and you're handed a small, dainty booklet. Inside are numbered slots for each dance of the evening. Your job to fill them with gentlemen's names, but not just any names. Your dance card had to balance social obligation with subtle ambition. Family, friends, dull cousins, and your chaperone's favourite vicar all required a slot. Leave them out and someone would definitely notice. This isn't Tinder. You're not allowed to switch partners mid-dance, and heaven forbid you accept 2 dances from the same man before you're engaged. Dancing twice with a man in a single evening meant something. It might not scream engaged, but it certainly whispered interested, and whispers travelled fast. Now, let's talk about the waltz, Ah, yes, the waltz. That slow, rotating, mildly scandalous embrace that changed the Victorian dance scene forever. When it first arrived, it caused absolute panic. Why? Because it involved touching, real, gloved, breath-sharing proximity. Before the waltz, dances were more like synchronized promenades. But the waltz, that was chest to chest, well, corset to coat, arms around waists, a brief yet blazing bubble of intimacy right in the middle of a chandelier-lit battlefield. At first, only married couples or daring debutantes attempted it, but as the years progressed, it became socially acceptable, with supervision. Your chaperone still watched from the sidelines like a hawk in pearls. The trickiest part was ending the dance. At its conclusion, your partner bowed, you curtsied, and he escorted you to your seat. Public delivery was mandatory. You exchanged the briefest of pleasantries, and then he vanished, or circled back to hover just enough to be noticed. And sometimes a girl might simply not dance. Maybe she was ill, or mourning, or making a silent protest. In those cases, she might sit quietly, her card blank, her gaze neutral. But that came with its own peril, the dreaded wallflower label. Wallflowers were women who, for whatever reason, weren't asked to dance. Once labelled, it was hard to shake. So tonight, as the string quartet strikes up a familiar tune, you glide onto the floor. Your gloves are tight, your card is full. You take your partner's hand, you step, and for a few dizzying moments beneath the gaslight and gilded cornices, you're not just a young lady surviving etiquette. You are dancing on the edge of danger, one turn at a time. The dinner table minefield. By now, you've successfully navigated the drawing room, decoded glances, waltzed with restraint, and survived the judgmental stares of every embroidered sofa in sight. But all of that fades in comparison to the most terrifying arena in Victorian society, the dinner table. This wasn't just about eating, it was about performing a flawlessly choreographed act of elegance while covered in lace and surrounded by gravy-based landmines. You're seated between two gentlemen, strategically chosen by the hostess, and your job for the next 2 hours is to make small talk, eat without chewing audibly, and avoid committing one of the many dining taboos. Let's begin with the napkin. It's placed delicately on your lap, not tucked into your collar. You unfold it quietly and place it across your lap, as if it just drifted there by accident. Wipe your mouth discreetly. Never wipe your face. Never, under any circumstance, drop it. Dropping your napkin could mean disaster. If you bend down to grab it, you risk flashing a glimpse of ankle. Then, the cutlery situation. There is so much of it, aligned like battalions, and the rule is simple: work from the outside in. But in the panic of the moment, your mind goes blank. You glance to your left, you glance to your right, you copy them, you survive. But the real horror is the food itself. Victorian cuisine could be elaborate, unidentifiable, or just aggressively slimy. Jellied eels, brain cutlets, and boiled calves' feet were all fair game, and you must eat it politely. Take small bites, chew with your mouth closed. Never speak with food in your mouth. Never salt your food before tasting it. That implies you doubt the cook's ability, which is grounds for exile. If you dislike something, just leave it quietly. Making a face or pushing it aside will earn you a permanent slot on the scandal roster. And then we have the sauce conundrum. Sauces were everywhere, and they were dangerous. They dripped, they splashed, they betrayed. One flick of the wrist, and suddenly your elbow-length gloves are covered in a horrific terrine. Historians still debate whether the overuse of sauces was a culinary preference or a societal tactic to test composure under fire. After all, if you can maintain elegance with hot goose fat dribbling across your crinoline, you can handle anything. The end of dinner, even that was regimented. The hostess would give a subtle signal and the ladies would rise, leaving their napkins behind. They would sweep out of the room like a bouquet of whispering ghosts, heading for the drawing room while the men remained for cigars and politics. Once in the drawing room, you resumed your ladylike duties, polite conversation, quiet sighs, and pretending you definitely didn't almost sneeze into a salmon mousse. Mourning, the gown of grief. The soup is settled, the lace gloves are peeled away, and you've survived yet another night of social survivalism. But now comes the most emotionally exhausting performance of all, one that requires no fans, no forks, no coy glances. Mourning. Because when someone in your life dies in Victorian England, you don't just grieve, you enter a rigid, multi-phase mourning ritual that could dominate your clothing and your social life for up to 2.5 years. Let's say your cousin, or heaven forbid your husband, passes away. Your sadness is expected, but your mourning behaviour must be flawless, starting with your wardrobe. You don't simply wear black, you wear mourning black, matte, non-reflective, often dyed with logwood. No jewellery, unless it's jet or made from human hair. Yes, hair. Mourning jewellery often featured woven locks from the deceased, worn in rings, brooches or lockets. It's romantic, maybe, and undeniably creepy. For a widow, this period of deep mourning lasts at least 1 year and a day. During that time, your wardrobe is basically a fashion prison. Black bombazine, crepe veils, jet jewellery, and bonnets so heavy with symbolism they could double as tombstones. No visiting, no attending social functions, no music, no smiling too much, and definitely no dancing. After a year, you might shift into half mourning. This meant you could wear grey or lavender, but not both at once. You might rejoin society in small, controlled ways. Even in grief, the etiquette was competitive. One woman wore mourning for 3 full years after her husband's death, earning her the nickname the Eternal Widow. Another was criticised for returning to church only 6 months after her brother's passing. Historians still argue whether this elaborate grief etiquette offered comfort or cruelty. Some say it gave structure to overwhelming emotion. Others believe it was designed to police women's behaviour, turning natural sorrow into a theatre of endless denial. Men had mourning rules too, but theirs were simpler, shorter, and, surprise, far more forgiving. A black armband, a dark suit, and after a few months life resumed. Women, however, were expected to carry the visible burden of grief like a full-time job. To forget to mourn correctly could jeopardise not only your social standing, but also your moral reputation. A cheerful widow? Untrustworthy. A laughing mourner? Indecent. But through all this there was power in mourning, the power to set boundaries, to opt out of the marriage market, to claim space in a world that rarely allowed women to define their own roles. In the crepe and jet and silence, some found freedom, albeit cloaked in sorrow. So tonight, as you imagine yourself in the flickering candlelight of a darkened drawing room, your dress is heavy, your veil drawn. Your grief is visible, curated, and officially sanctioned. You sip your tea in silence, and for once, nobody expects you to smile. The veil of night. And now, finally, you let the veil fall away. Not the mourning kind, but the gauzy, imaginative one we've worn together tonight. The corsets unclasp, the gloves slip off, the ballroom hush fades. You're no longer balancing teacups, decoding fan signals, or avoiding eye contact. You're just here, still breathing. The strange rules, the endless posture checks, the swirling dance of Victorian expectations, it all melts into a soft, distant fog, like a parlour mirror gently fogged over, hiding sharp edges, smoothing the outlines of a world that was at once impossibly rigid and absurdly theatrical. Let your shoulders sink into the mattress now. Feel the tension ebb away like the final notes of a string quartet echoing down the hall. No more etiquette, no more whispered judgments, just you, weightless, drifting through velvet dark stillness. The night deepens, the world outside hushes. The bustle of 1,000 silent rules, the creak of morning gowns, the clink of a spoon against bone china, all of it fades. What's left is quiet, safe, simple. You are no longer performing. You are resting. Let yourself surrender to that slowness, that hush. Let your breathing stretch out like a curtain being drawn. You've survived the unspoken code of an entire era. Now it's time to sleep, not under the rules of society, but beneath the calm of your own soft quiet. You did well tonight. Sleep deeply now, knowing the world will still be there in the morning, just a little less corseted.